My name is Noah Meir. I am the CEO of the Charney Forum for New Diplomacy, and I'm very excited to have 50 people and counting for our panel tonight, leveraging a moment of crisis into change, perspectives on Black Lives Matter. A key feature of the digital revolution is the unprecedented volume of information, which has caused a disruption in most, if not all, aspects of our lives, including the field of diplomacy. The global crisis created by COVID-19 exacerbates this disruption, increasing the need to address the many challenges created. Information overload, hyperconnectivity, social media, and countless news feeds have led to sectarian discourse, fake news, and echo chambers. The Charney Forum, in collaboration with the University of Haifa, offers workshops, seminars, and conferences with top-notch speakers and experts. We offer diverse content presenting a wide range of perspectives about complex issues, providing practical skills and tools to navigate the information overload, global collaborations, and the extensive use of digital platforms. Here with us today, or tonight, depends where you are, is Charney, who spearheaded the Charney Forum for New Diplomacy a couple of years ago on the tail end of the previous era to deal with the overload of information, which, as I mentioned, generates simplified solutions to complex problems. Tilly aspires to promote open, diverse, and effective civil discourse amongst people and between organizations. And I would like, on a personal note, to thank you, Tilly, so much for allowing me to work in something that feels anything but a job. And on this note, I'd also like to thank our chairman, Ido Aroni, and my very dedicated and professional staff, Maya Fintz and Einat Hakim. Our panel tonight is about an issue that has and continues to be addressed and debated in countless forms of media, including academia, books, articles, news, TV shows, movies, art, and so much more. Racism comes in many shapes and forms and is an ailment as old as time. Our mission at the Charney Forum for Diplomacy focuses on the importance of listening and recognizing diverse narratives, expanding our echo chambers, so to speak. Having said that, we recognize that there are many offshoots to this discussion that could easily fill up a year-long course. We will try to address a top few, and I look forward to the debate at the end because I'm sure we're going to get a lot of interesting questions from our participants. But before we dive into the different perspectives that we are showcasing here tonight, if I had to say more or less from the US and from Israel, but even within the US, it's very different perspectives, I do want to give a bit of context to where we are to put us all on the same page. African Americans did not choose to come to America. They were enslaved, tormented, and abused solely for the color of their skin. After more than 200 years of slavery, following a bloody civil war, the 13th Amendment was ratified, putting an end to slavery. Sadly, this served as merely a constitutional change. Jim Crow laws enforced mandated racial segregation in all public facilities. The decisive action ending segregation came when Congress passed the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Unfortunately, racism and discrimination continued and continues to prevail, covertly and overtly. Black Lives Matter is at the center of one of the most critical fights for justice in the US. The history of Ethiopian Jews could not be more different from that of African Americans. Ethiopian Jews were longing for Zion and embarked on a long and difficult journey to Israel in a planned and secret rescue mission facilitated by the State of Israel as the realization of a 2,000-year dream. Most of the Jewish Ethiopians, approximately 40,000 at the time, immigrated to Israel throughout the 20th century, thousands having lost their lives in their extensive and trying journey. Upon arrival, the reality was 180 degrees from that which they had dreamed and longed for. Very quickly, they encountered racism from Israeli society, including having their Judaism questioned. And now, finally, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our wonderful speakers. If I would introduce them with their full resumes, then you would only be hearing me tonight. And since we don't want that to happen, I will just say briefly that we have with us tonight Pnina Aginyahu, speaker, Jewish educator, social activist, and today works at the Jewish Agency of Israel. And also, full disclosure, she is a good personal friend. Alexia Butler, development diplomat in residence, USAID. And last but by no means least, Princess Sarah Culberson, co-founder of Sierra Leone Rising, author, public speaker, humanitarian, philanthropist, actress. We will now start the conversation where our panels will be addressed with different questions, and we will do our best to leave as much time as possible at the end for Q&A. Please write your questions in the chat box, and our staff, our team will review, and we will ask as many as we can at the end. So let's dive in. Alexius, you served in the public service for many years, and in a way, you were faced with two glass ceilings, as a woman and as a person of color. Could you please share with us your personal perspective, having worked in a predominantly white male environment?
Sure. I should start off with a bit more of background and note that I grew up in Atlanta, Georgia, so home of the civil rights movement in the US, and an environment where you often saw Blacks in positions of authority. We've had a Black mayor for all of my life. I'm from the district where John Lewis, the recently departed congressman and civil rights activist, represented our district in Congress for 40 years. And so, you know, you have that dynamic on the one side, but at the same time, I was the first generation, I was among the first generation born post legal segregation. So I didn't have to sit in the back of the bus, but my mother did. I didn't have to use separate bathrooms, but my mother did. And so I say that to say that you're constantly reminded from, even without legal segregation in place, that you are a Black person and then that you're a Black woman, because you're still in the South and the attitudes didn't change so much along with the legality of segregation. Moving into working internationally and particularly working in the Foreign Service, it is heavily dominated by white men. And given my background, I think that one of the things that happened in my career, at least, is that you begin to accept certain things. You know, someone makes a comment and you just pass it off as that's that person, and it's not reflective of me and my work. That is more reflective of them and their biases and attitudes on how the world should work. However, I have to say it does become very tiring, and you begin to realize that you're carrying a burden that you weren't really so aware of, because you walk in a meeting, and you're the only Black person in the room, let alone the only woman sitting at the table. And so you're constantly aware of who you are within that perspective, but also constantly aware that you're being judged based on those things, you know? And Noah and I talked a little bit about microaggressions versus macroaggressions, which is part of the dialogue that we have in the US now, when we're looking at racism and biases and how it actually affects the way we operate. Microaggressions are those things that are targeted to an individual by an individual. So for example, someone doesn't want to work for a Black person because they just can't get along for some reason, right? I have really good friends that are white South Africans, and we were having a similar conversation, and they were pointing out, you know, their grandparents, they didn't like Meghan Markle, and they just couldn't figure out they couldn't put their finger on it, but they just didn't like her, right? That's a microaggression. Whereas a macroaggression is more systemic. In the US, one of the challenges that we have is our justice system. You have Blacks and Hispanic Americans disproportionately serving it in the prison population. However, it's disproportionate to the representation within the population overall outside of the prisons. And so those are seen as systemic issues that are disproportionately affecting certain groups of people and would be categorized as a macroaggression. Now, taking all that into consideration, you know, you as an individual, all these things are constantly going through your mind. And these are burdens that you are aware that white individuals do not share or do not carry, particularly white men. And so I would say that one of the biggest impacts on my career since Black Lives Matter has started is that I have taken to heart the idea that if I see something, I should say something. I should no longer accept the different treatment that I recognize I'm receiving versus my white male colleagues. Previously, I wouldn't have said anything because you don't want to become the angry Black woman, right? And that moniker is one that is used often in describing Black women in workplace because, you know, you're too loud, you're too angry, you change your hair too often. These, you know, these types of things that actually go on. And at a certain point in time, I got to the point where I was like, I was tired of trying to educate people on why I changed my hair, why Black people do things this way, et cetera. Why it sounds like we're arguing when we're talking to each other very animatedly, things like that. And I recognize that I'm actually doing myself a disservice as a representative of my government and as a member of my community, being, you know, the American community. And so I have to speak up and I have to say something. And so that's kind of the change that has come about for me from Black Lives Matter, as far as my career and how I approach it, is that speak up in the moment when I recognize something is wrong, but also keep in mind that some of these biases, we all have biases, right? And some of these biases are ones that people are willing to acknowledge and work to overcome, and some of them are not. But my role going forward is to acknowledge those biases when I see them happening. So I would just start off with that.
Thank you. That's quite a lot to chew off, and I have a feeling it's going to be a recurring theme, but thank you so much for sharing that. I'm going to move next. I'm going to unmute her first. Oh, no, sorry. Wait. Oh, no, I'm okay. So Princess Sarah, you have a very unique story, which actually deserves an entire event in and of itself. But could you please share your perspective as someone with a multifaceted identity, biracial, raised by white adopting parents, and with deep African roots and status?
So just to, yes, and thank you for having me. Just to give a little background, you shared a bit, but I am adopted into an all-white family in West Virginia. My birth father is from Sierra Leone, West Africa. My birth mother was a white American, and I was adopted as a baby. And I know what you talk about being the only person of color around because that was my family, this loving family that I grew up in. And I actually kind of was constantly navigating a lot of things. And then I went to West Africa and met my birth father and met the entire tribe. And then there was a whole nother level of learning about another culture. So being African American, and also having a white birth mother and growing up in a white family has had me have a lot of different perspectives and had me kind of be able to move in and out of different conversations, I think, in a way, because I've had to learn how to code switch and how to really understand what's happening. And I think inside of the Black Lives Matter movement, it's been so important to look at what's been happening all over the world, what's been going on for a long time, and actually what we're now capturing, because we have devices such as cell phones that can actually capture what's injustices that are happening. So I'm grateful to be here today to talk more about this conversation.
Thank you. This is tricky. I need to unmute and mute. 1 second. Pnina, can you please share your perspective as an Ethiopian Jew who walked thousands of miles to Israel with your mother and siblings at the tender age of 3, with an emphasis on the dream and its aftermath? That was my attempt to translate from Hebrew, Hachalom b'shivro. I don't know if I managed to. But as you listen to Alexia's and Sarah's experiences, what resonates with you as a Black Jew living in Israel? What are some similarities and differences that, from your perspective, between people of color in the US and Israel?
So good evening to everyone. I'm in Israel, it's like 8:20. And thanks God the kids are already sleeping, so it's quiet. So for me, I actually was fortunate enough not to really walk the entire journey because I was 3 years old and my mother carried me on. But my mom was a young, brave woman. She was 27 years old, carrying with her 2 little girls, myself and my older sister, who ended up living in the States. and married to African American, which is all, all coming back in a big picture. So for my mother, it was a very innocent and pure state of mind. It was about coming to Zion, to Jerusalem, joining the Jewish people. Well, in her mind, the Jewish people are Black people, and they are Jewish as we practice Judaism in Ethiopia, which is more biblical, not the oral Torah, not the development of the Jewish life that we know today, the common one that we're more familiar with today. And it's more tribal concept of being a Jew. And when there's no other concept of being Jew, you couldn't be a secular or ultra-Orthodox. You were just a Jew observing what God told you in the Bible. And you were isolated yourself from the, from Christians and Muslims communities in Ethiopia. So that's where in her mind, and that's what basically in the mind of most of our parents, which I think it's very significant to understand coming to Israel. It was more shocking than, gaining new language as Hebrew, which every immigrant have to do and challenge himself with. It's a new culture that challenge you, but it's all was kind of, flowing away for our parents. What was more challenging and more meaningful for them to really understand in a minute of arriving to Israel is to, first of all, to see that we're the minority. The majority is white Jew. There is white people that are Jewish, which was for us a surprise as well. It wasn't like just a challenge to the white people to understand there is a Black Jew, but for us it was a surprising to understand there is a white Jew. And second of all, to understand that the Judaism practice in Israel is different from what we practice. So now they question our Jewishness because we weren't Jewish enough. So all of this was, challenging our being and how we actually feel belonging and part of the Jewish society and the Israel society as well. So I feel that the Black perspective of the concept of that the two other great women spoke about, that I can totally feel the same way. I feel like for us, it's the additional level or additional layer for that. It's also the belonging to the Jewish people, which was very important and very significant to our community. But, color and race wasn't the question in Ethiopia. It wasn't a thing that we thought about. We never thought that it's going to be something that will be questioned or challenged or will be problematic in our identity coming back home to the homeland of the Jewish people. We never thought it's going to be something that we need to face or explain. So for me, I would just give an example that you just remind me now. I grew up in my family until today is the only Ethiopian family in the city of Haifa in the north until today. When we came 35 years ago, I was actually the first Black girl in the elementary school, I can say, until the second wave of the Ethiopian Jews came to Israel. And I have to say that I guess, no one talked about it back then. So I never noticed that I'm different. Everyone was white around me in the school. Everyone was white in the neighborhood. I never saw myself as a different person. I never noticed to my skin color until the second wave of the Solomon operation happened in 1990. And we welcomed new immigrants from Ethiopia. And the principal of the school asked me personally to welcome the new immigrant. And I asked her, why me? From all the kids in school. And that was a moment that I understood that there's another group now in the school that I have something in common with them, which was the same language, the same culture, the smell, the food. I understood everything, and I felt so terrible for them because no one wanted to play with them in the break time. They were like isolated from everyone. And that was the first time ever that one of the white kids at school came to me and asked me, Pnina, if you still want to be our friends and you want to look like us, I can color you in white and then you're going to be like us. That was a part in my life, that I start asking questions of identity. And it was the third grade or fourth grade. I start asking myself, wait a minute, I'm different, really? Do I have a different blood? Do I have a different name, different identity, different thing? And I start asking those questions as a child. And my mom never had any answers for me. I mean, at least at that time, I never thought she had a good answer because she just told me, ignore it, doesn't matter. This is not an important thing to struggle with now. You should focus on your studies, So for me, that was, it's really related to what you both shared, that explaining all the time, you know, who I am and why I'm belonging to this community and why I have the rights to be part of the, in our sense, a part of the Jewish people or the Jewish states. I think that's one of the things that I find that today as an adult, that it shouldn't exist. I shouldn't explain, and I shouldn't have any excuse, and I shouldn't, you know, give any reasons or answer to anyone to explain why I'm here.
Amen to that. And then may that become a reality sooner rather than later. Before I move on to my next round of questions, just to remind everyone, chat box is live and waiting for your questions, so we can ask at the end. Back to Princess Sarah. One of the several injustices towards minorities and people of color has been demonstrated in their misrepresentation in Hollywood, both in terms of actors and character portrayals in movies and in TV shows. I'd love to hear what you have experienced throughout your career as an actress.
That part of my life. That's a really great question. I was actually, to think about that, I remember this time when I went to an audition in early 2000s, 2001, 2002 time. And I was working with students at a school to teach them dancing. And I said to my agent, can I go early to this audition? Because I really would like to get back to work with my students. And she said, yeah, no problem. So I show up early to the audition. This is my example of this. And I get there. And the funny thing about auditions in the commercial world is you don't even have to read the signs. You just go to the people that look like you because you're so typecasted. You don't even need to know what commercial it's for. It's like, oh, these people all look like me. Let me go there. So I showed up. No one looked like me anywhere. And I thought, great. So I walk over to the casting director and I said, I'm here early. I really want to go work with some kids after school. Can I be seen early? And it was for a couple. And everyone there was white. And they said, well, we need you to wait until the other folks get here. Basically, we need you to wait till the other black men get here so you can be seen with a black man in this audition, because the car commercial is basically the underlying is you can't be seen with a white man in a commercial, because then people who are racist across the country are not going to buy the car. They're going to be worried about you two rather than the product. So
what year is this?
Huh?
What year is this? Just to contextualize.
This is 2001.
Wow.
Not that long. Like, we're in the year 2000s, right? And this is happening.
Wow.
And I ended up having to change the schedule with my students. I had to wait. And I sat there to myself and I thought, we're in this time period and this is still what's going on. And to be honest, my birth mother's white, my birth father's African. We exist. Can we not be shown on television? Oh my gosh. I mean, it's fascinating. I mean, that's one of the examples that I've experienced. And also trying to think of some other things. I think one of the other things that kind of gets to be difficult is writing. I remember auditioning for a role for a movie. And by the way, I did book that commercial. Just not that that matters, but but it doesn't. But it was so much. It was very frustrating. But anyway, I went out for this audition, and I was actually reading for a part of playing the girlfriend of someone, and the stereotypes that were written into this character blew me out of the water. The stereotypes of an African American, like, we are all like this, and we're all so vastly different as Black people, as African Americans, as Africans. To put one label on a group of people when we're all so vastly different was very frustrating to me. And I felt like it was just reiterating stereotypes, biases that are already out there. And I actually didn't want the role. So I think having writers that write, there's so many writers out there that write for people and understand people of color, I think is so important. Or having writers that are not of color getting in people of color's world to really write scripts and things that speak to who we are, not just what they hear or see on television. So those were some of the things that I was dealing with as an actress.
Quick follow-up question, because you're saying this was 2001, the first story you were telling us about.
Right.
It does seem beyond, I don't know, well, the word is absurd, doesn't describe it even.
Right.
Oh,
Really.
sorry,
And I just want to say also, we're talking about the acting world, and then there's another conversation around policies, but that can come later. But when we think about what people are seeing, what children are seeing visually all the time, like what are the messages they're getting? In 2016 was the first commercial, I believe, and I'm pretty sure it's accurate, a Cheerios commercial where there was a white woman with a black man and a biracial little girl.
And it caused a huge kerfuffle.
Wow. Wait, did Sarah just freeze for me?
She froze for everybody, I think.
Oh. Okay. I'll move on to you, Alexis, and then I'll come back to Sarah.
I literally froze. And
There she is.
am I here?
You're
Yeah.
back.
Okay.
The wonders of Zoom.
So, right, the wonders of Zoom, the magic of Zoom. So the Cheerios commercial is so beautiful. It's such a beautiful heart.
And Alexia said, as you froze, that it created a huge controversy.
Huge.
And
They had to take 2016. They had to take the commercial down.
Oh.
So what is that saying when people say, "Oh, there's not racism," or are you kidding me? A commercial causes that much of an issue. So anyway, these are the things.
Okay. I will want to hear from you later. I'm curious. I was going to ask you if it's improved, but if this is 2016, then I'm guessing not really. But we'll move on now. Same issue, but to a different focus. Alexius, if you can share, from your professional experience as, in the world of diplomacy, and you've served in many places that I am confident without even knowing that they were predominantly white men, in Afghanistan and Haiti and Bangladesh, just to name a few. Have you witnessed any change in the integration and attitude towards women and women of color?
I think that, it's important to know that, honestly, one of the reasons I wanted to go and work internationally was because I wanted to be able to be treated fairly, to at least be on an even playing field, right, with individuals. And so I was so excited about going to Africa because I was like, okay, I'm going to finally be in a country that is majority Black, right, where I won't be treated differently because of my skin color. And unfortunately, that was not my experience. Particularly when you are a representative of the US government, everyone expects the white man to be the one in charge. And so even when you're the one in charge, and mind you, I was in the Haiti mission, I was the number 2 in the mission for USAID. I would still have people walking into the room and they would be like, well, is the mission director joining us? As if my presence was not sufficient. And that happens, unfortunately, it happens within the diplomatic corps, as well as in dealing with our counterparts internationally. And so I think that there's a need to have more diversity within the Foreign Service so that the people that are actually seen by the internationals we're working with are more representative of what the US actually looks like. Similar to what Sarah was saying about what you see on TV. If you're not seeing the reality of your life represented on TV, what does that say about your value within that culture? And I think that I have now taken on, like I said earlier, a little bit more of the advocacy role, where particularly if I'm the only woman in the room, I'm going to sit at the table and not on the back bench. And because I need to be there because I know that you're looking at me from that lens, so I might as well be the representative and own that role. And so I think that things have changed a little bit. We've taken some back steps. Some of you may have heard about some Inspector General audits that were done of the Foreign Service that noted that the diversity numbers have actually gone down in recent years, particularly among underrepresented groups, including women, minorities, et cetera. And the number of Black ambassadors or ambassadors from any non-white ethnic group has decreased to less than 10. And you know, and on the USAID side, our leadership is also in the field is also significantly lower than it used to be in, you know, in the 80s and 90s even. And so one of the things that I'm doing right now is focusing on minority recruitment so that we can get more people within the agency who are actually representative of the US population. And, you know, granted, we won't see that in the next year, but hopefully in the next 10 years, those individuals will move into greater leadership positions and can impact change. At the same time, you know, we've still got policies and, you know, and it goes back to what I keep saying, what I said before, which is if you see something, say something, because that's the only way we're actually going to learn and be able to advance is by calling people on their biases, because oftentimes you may not even be aware that you have that bias. And I'm biased as much as anyone else is. And so call me on my biases, and that way I can learn and I can take that in and I can do better when I go forward.
I'm curious to hear, any assumption why it's decreased in the previous years, the diverse representation?
The data has really been that a lot of those who joined the agency realized that the glass ceiling is much lower for those of us who are not white males than it is for the white males. So they've been able to access those leadership positions easier. And so now they're looking into how they can correct that, into trying to remove the subjective components of our foreign service promotions, because before, you know, you had to know the right people and you had to say the right things, et cetera. And if you're not from one of those groups who's in the, you know, the in circle, then you don't know those people and you don't know what to say. And so by increasing the number of people that participate in the promotion process, you're also watering down that whole, you know, what we call in the South, the good old boys club, right? Mm-hmm. So the group of people that keep running things up until they're too old to do it, and then they just hand it off to the next generation. And so trying to break down that good old boys club and allow as many people as possible in who meet, you know, the qualifications. So there's efforts in place, but these reports only just came out, I want to say earlier this year. And then coupled with Black Lives Matter, I think there's a much bigger focus on diversity and the need to give a platform within the Foreign Service to diverse individuals so that we can really speak about our experience. Because previously, you know, I think I told you, Noah, you know, about a couple of experiences that I've had. And if you talked about your experiences, you were always put in a position to have to defend why you felt that you were treated differently. Because often it would be, no, I don't think he meant that. No, there's no way. Okay, he's only doing this to you and 5 other Black people. No, he can't be racist. You know, and it's like, oh, he is. And if you acknowledge that, then we can move forward and we can figure out how to address it. But by denying it, you're denying me and you're denying all those others within the Foreign Service who have had that experience.
Very interesting. By the way, we also have Israel is a very much male-dominated and boys' club sort of society, and you see it largely because of the military. So it's both in terms of gender. It absolutely adds to that the issue of color, but we absolutely are familiar with having those, you know, boys' club, and all you have to do is look at our government and, you know, how far we are from where we want and should be. Having said that, Pnina, can you please address the integration of Israeli Ethiopians into Israeli society? And I know that again is more than 5 minutes, but just a bit for people who are not familiar, because you're very active and obviously very involved, and I'd love them to hear from you.
So yeah, it's gonna be hard in 5 minutes, but I'll try.
I was gonna say 3. Yeah. I extended another 2.
Too large. But if we look at, you know, let's look at the data first. Today we're talking about a community that it's in the size of 150,000 Ethiopian Jews living in Israel. Almost around 90,000 of them, or a bit less, came to Israel, immigrant to Israel, and the rest was born in Israel, which I will call them definitely Israelis. That came from, that are originally, their parents are originally from Ethiopia, but they are Israelis like any other Israelis. So if you look at the integration, I think one of the challenges that I see, beside what I mentioned before, is that somehow we always look like immigrant. Somehow we always will be treated as a new immigrant, even if we 30 years here, and even if my own kids was born in Israel, people will look at them first as an Ethiopian. It's just easier because the skin color, and then as an Israeli, which I find that is a challenge that have to be deal on the table, like face it and talk about it. As you said, Alexis, talking about, admitting that racism and talk about it. So let's admit it that, those are Israelis. They're not just an Ethiopian. This is their identity. And I think that's what also caused a lot of tension among the young generation today in Israel, that we see them more in protesting in every case and issue that we have with police profiling, etc. Because the sense of belonging, it's instead of growing, it's decreasing to the society in Israel. And that's because if you change your name to a Hebrew name, you serve in the army, and if I'm talking only about myself, change my name to Pnina, my original name is Felagu. I serve in the army, I'm educated, and I went to higher education. I have, lots of white friends like Noah. So I feel like I'm fully integrated, right? I'm not facing too much challenges. But then if I see that the school in my kid go to school, one of the good ones in the city we live, and he's still the only one that coming from Ethiopian region, it tells you something. And I'm not talking about 2001. In 2020, there are still cities in Israel that are not fully integrated. If in the city of Modi'in, there's only 20 Ethiopian families that can afford themselves to live in the city, or that's the municipality welcome this amount of people to their city from this region, it's telling you something about the society as well. I don't need data and more numbers about it to understand what's happening if you look at the integration. So yes, we have 2 members of the Knesset today. One is a minister for the first time, a minister of observations and immigration, which is really great and amazing. And a lot of people in our community and outside of the community feel it's a success. And it is a success. I don't want to minor that, but I feel like a full success and full integration will be when we see more people like us in a daily basis jobs. When I see Ethiopian teachers, when I will see Ethiopian bankers, when I will see Ethiopian lawyers, people that you really meet in a daily basis, and not, who made a member of the Knesset in a day. You don't really see them, you don't really meet them. So it's great that we have that. And many times when I give lectures in the Israel Society, people in the audience will tell me, so what's this success in your eyes? You wanna have a prime minister from the Ethiopian community? No, tell the truth. I don't care if you're gonna have a prime minister from the Ethiopian community or president, the first Black president in Israel. No, because I think we're not there yet. We're still in a place where kids in my son's school, growing up, not knowing what it's a brown person. And why I know that, because if he's the only one in his class and it's an entire school, and for the first 2 weeks being in school, the kids come up to him and ask him why he's brown, and if his family is brown, and how come they white and he's brown. And I don't blame them. They just kids, they're interested and they're curious and they want to know and understand what's happening. But the school system didn't have any model of educating about diversity. They didn't talk about what is a diversity, who exists in our society as a state. And we are a very diverse society. It's a state where every 3rd person walking on the street is an immigrant by himself, or is a son or daughter of an immigrant. There's immigrants here from more than 80 different countries in the world. It's the most, diverse and complex society. So talking about, full integration, I'm excited to see, young Ethiopian in reality shows today in the TV. Why? Not because I watch those TV shows, but because I feel like young people, some of them, but I think because, when young Ethiopian kids and young white kids see them, so they know we exist, first of all, okay? That we're here, even if we don't live next to them. Second of all, if you see, a teacher, a Black teacher in your school, to respect that person, because the teacher is authority. It's the first authority you meet beside your parents. So if you respect that, I'm not talking only about what it's doing to our kids, to the Ethiopian kids, but what it's doing to the white kids in school. They will never now anticipate to see me here. They will know that I can reach here as well. Because I think part of the I would say, downers of our integration is that most of the people have, I would say people, not a policymaker, not necessarily the institution, but the majority of the people that here in Israel, they don't have too much expectation from us, unfortunately. If they keep being surprised when they see me and others similar to me get into those kind of positions, they shouldn't be surprised. If I'm here for 30 years already, and I'm being educated in the Israeli education system, and I speak fully Hebrew, etc. If I'm speaking such a beautiful Hebrew, a person shouldn't come and ask me, how come you have such a beautiful Hebrew? Why not? And I'm getting that question so many times in my life that I'm sick of answering that question. I mean, the next person gonna ask me that, I'm just gonna throw them in the street. Why shouldn't I have such a good Hebrew if I'm here since I was 3 years old? So the concept of seeing us as an immigrant always, it doesn't give us any good, any benefit. It just keeps us always in the same level of minority that is not successing, that cannot reach higher, because that's the assumption that people have on new immigrating that coming from, development countries like us, which, in the other side and the opposite side of it, I will come and say, great job. 150,000 Ethiopian Jews living in Israel. We have today around 4,000 students in the higher education. We have more than 400 senior officers in the army. We have 2 members of the Knesset, as I said before, policemen, and I can go on, artists and singers and famous international singers like Espirada. And I can say, those people came from a third world country in 4 hours of a flight to Israel, and they accomplished so much with all the challenge we face. So I will look at it maybe this way. I'm not saying that I want my white friend to come to me and chop me on the check and say, good job, Nina, you got so far. It's not about that, but I think the narrative needs to be changed. We're not just Olim, we're not just an immigrant, we're not just an Ethiopian. We first of all, like everyone else, Israelis, we have the same identity. And second of all, yes, we can reach higher and we can reach to those kind of positions. And I think that need to change. And if you give me 30 seconds, just because Sarah.
You're taking advantage of our friendship and it's not nice.
I have to share with you something that Sarah just reminded me. You talked about in 2001, the audition you talked about. So in 2012, I don't know if the Israelis in the room here remember that. There was a series of commercials by Cellcom, one of the biggest cell phone cellular companies in Israel, that did a series of coming back home. Each time it was a different set of coming back home. It was a soldier coming back home. It was a young couple coming back from India back home, and everyone looked like a normative families living in Israel, and they're coming back home from vacation, from the office, from the army service, etc. One day they decided to do that with Black people, with the Ethiopian community. But how it looked like, it was the same thing again. It's the same image. They saw a plane, that new immigrant coming down from Ethiopia, landing in Israel, and Israeli soldiers welcoming them. It's the same story and the same narrative again, even in the commercial. And I was so pissed because, first of all, I was with a lot of hormones. It was my first child. I was pregnant, and I was watching this commercial, and I was sure there's a new movie about the Ethiopian Aliyah, and I was so excited, and I was so emotional about it. And then it's end up with the commercial of Selkum bringing you back home. And I was pissed because you're using the same narrative. Why not? In 2012, you already have Ethiopian lawyers, actors. Why not to tell a story of a Ethiopian lawyer coming back home from his office? Why not? Because it's not exist? It is exist. You're not doing that because you still want to keep the same image of us weak and immigrants, and by the way, they took off that commercial after a month because many people like me complained to them.
It was very controversial. I remember that.
Why? You have the chance, finally, by the way, it was the first time that an Israeli company in Israel did a commercial with Black people, and they not just took something from America and translated it to Hebrew. First time they took Ethiopian actors to act in a commercial to have Black face on the TV. So use it for a good way, use it and to leverage it, not to, that's it.
Are you sure? So first of all, I want you to know that someone wrote in the chat box that you not only have great Hebrew, but you have fabulous English. And I also wanted, I'm going to risk telling a personal story from Pnina and I both were living in Washington, D.C. a few years ago. Pnina became my adopting family. And I don't know if I should say what show we were watching. Oh, what the heck. We were watching Scandal. And there was an episode where, and the main character, I think it's probably for the first time that it was a strong Black female character. And there was a scene, Pina, I don't know if you remember this, when we were watching it, there was a scene when she said to her father, her father said to her, don't you know, you're a Black woman. We need to work twice as hard in order to get to the, not even to the top, to the ceiling. And I remember, and for me, I'm embarrassed to say Pina is my first, not last, but my first, Ethiopian friend. And I was sort of born and raised in Israel, more or less. And Pina looked at me and she said, that's it. That's exactly it. And it was, for me, it was mind blowing. Okay, but now I'm going to move on to our next round. So the tipping point of the current widespread protests of the Black Lives Matter movement was the killing of George Floyd in the US. Just a bit of stats, African Americans are about 8 times more likely to be imprisoned than whites. 40% of people in prison in the US are African Americans when they are only 12.7% of the entire population. 2004 study reported that the majority of people sentenced to prison in the US are Black, and almost 1/3 Black men in their 20s. And they are either on parole, probation, or in prison. So these disproportionate levels of imprisonment have of course made incarceration a normalized occurrence for African American communities. Now, coupled along with George Floyd's death was the disproportionate impact of COVID-related illness and death in communities of color. And I think that further highlights the disparity of and the discrimination between, safe and security and something as basic as health. So I'd love to have Alexia and afterwards Sarah, or whoever wants to go first, to address that, how you regard that turning point. And leave time for the hope and change. That's the next question. But for now, if we can just look at that turning point and how you see it and how you've experienced it.
I would describe that moment as one for me where I was just so tired of seeing the same thing, because this, for majority of the world, I think, was the first time they had seen something like that. But if you grow up Black in the US, you've seen that most of your life. Police brutality that's directed specifically at Blacks. It's not exclusive to men. Women were also harassed and killed by policemen for very little cause. And often it was not investigated, or even if it was investigated and went to trial, the police would always get off. And so there was never any type of justice in those situations. And so I think that as a Black woman, like I said, it was a moment of exhaustion, and you're like, okay, this is happening yet again. And I think that a lot of those who are younger than I am, who recognize that we have to be more active and get out more. I mean, one of the things I think about that I think my generation has done was that we became a bit complacent, right? We like I said, we didn't grow up with segregation, so we had it better than our parents. And then during our lives, we saw several Black firsts happening, the first Black president, first Black national security advisor, et cetera, et cetera. And so we saw these firsts happening. And so it felt like there was some forward momentum happening at a certain level, but then at that daily interaction level, you're still afraid of the police. And so whenever you're driving and you see the police pull up behind you, there's that quickening of your heart, like, oh my God, what is going to happen? Am I going to be dragged off to jail for talking back? Am I going to be physically molested? Which has happened. Police officer would pull a Black woman out of the car and pat her down and be very forward with how aggressive they are with the pat down. And so, so I think, it was great to see that younger generation, the people in their 20s, getting out and saying, absolutely not. We need to be more engaged. We need to get everybody involved. And I also went out for the first time in my life. I went out and started participating in protests as well. And then, you know, you're seeing the changes that are happening at another level about those conversations. I mean, Sarah was talking a bit more about the, you know, the entertainment industry, but I remember when the boycott of the Oscars happened, it was called Oscars So White. That was a huge thing because everybody across the board is saying, you know what, we're not going to participate in this process anymore. In the chat box, somebody mentioned something about athletes and being engaged in political movements. And in the US, you saw how the NFL players who were kneeling, protesting police brutality 2-3 years ago were treated. And then the NFL had to come back around and apologize following the George Floyd situation, because there was no way you could excuse that kneeling on someone's neck for that long a period of time. And in Congress, they actually did something where they kneeled for, I believe it was 8 minutes and 42 seconds. So they were down on their knees for the whole protection. That's a long period of time to be sitting on, have your knee on someone's neck. It doesn't go by quickly. And so I think, you know, recognizing that it's seeing the whole thing on tape, and I don't know if you've seen that there have been video that's been released prior to that moment when George Floyd was actually murdered. He wasn't killed, he was murdered. That, you know, that further makes it even more clear that this was wrong and should not happen. But again, it's stuff that has been happening to Blacks in the US for a long time. And so while it was a motivating factor, it was also one where people are looking to see what's going to happen. Are these policemen going to be prosecuted? Is there actually going to be justice system reform, or are we just having more conversations? My concern, quite honestly, is that in this election that's coming up, if there are some changes that happen, is that we'll all go back to that complacent point where we're like, okay, take a breath. Now we can get back to regular life, right? And so I hope that we're able to keep the momentum going. I mean, and I'm doing my part to be engaged as much as possible. And I see a lot more people who weren't traditionally involved. My son has been involved. And, you know, that generation, I think that they're leading us to a point where hopefully we can see some substantive change come about.
Amen to that. Sarah?
You know, when I think of, I feel like George Floyd represented what has been going on for so long, and his life was a breaking point for the world and for our country. And when we think about the police system in the United States was set up to protect property. Well, if we think about Black people were property. So it's kind of an interesting way to look at the police system. And we have institutionalized racism that is just what's so. And when you have people who have that much power, like we've talked about on the call, we all have implicit bias. We all have our own microaggressions, and we're all racist. I mean, Robin DiAngelo, I think, said it so well in her book, White Fragility. She talked about people making racism a moral conversation. Like, racism is bad, but I'm a good person, so I can't be racist. Then we're not actually dealing with the issue. But if we look at racism as a systemic issue that we all need to look at, then we can actually deal with, it's not a good or a bad, it's just what's so. What are we gonna do about it? How can we actually notice that this person in a situation is being racist to her while she's, and other people, you had mentioned, Alexis, about that happening in the government systems. And how do we need to recognize that's which is happening. And I was thinking about redlining and how people have been separated for a long time. If people don't know what redlining is, here in the United States, Black people, people of color were not allowed to live. Grocery stores go here and created food deserts, which cause a lot of the health issues because people don't have access to medical care and good food. So when we talk about the number of people who are in prison and people of color, some people go, well, they just must be all be bad. I've had people, well, these are the numbers that much. Well, why? I work with kids at the Oakwood School in North Hollywood. And if a kid is having an issue or acting out, I'm a director of outreach there. If kids are acting out, I don't go, you're just a bad kid. I go, what's going on? Why is this happening? Right? So many people in jail who are people of color, specifically Black people and Latinos. There's a book called The New Jim Crow. Just because certain racist laws are not in place, new racist laws have been put in place, which actually have entrapped a lot of people who are Black and Latino in this country. And when people don't know that, they just make an assumption about a whole group of people. And it's really important to do research, and it's really important to talk, Google. People really look up what's happening, look up these books, read these books, because I feel like they're so helpful to understand, why is this still happening in 2020? It's not just because, oh, these Black people must be bad. This has been going on for a long time. And Ta-Nehisi Coates talks about it in his books.
Sarah, one of the participants just held up the book. I think Bill.
Oh yeah?
Wilson.
I can't,
Yeah.
I'm not on the full view. Hold on.
Oh, okay.
Hey, let me see the book. Which book did you hold? Which book is being held up? I've got
The New Jim Crow.
Yes, The New Jim Crow. Such an important conversation. It's tough. It's hard to hear. When I was reading it, I was like, oh, I'm learning too. We're all learning what has been going on in this country. And I have become complacent. And I also wrote down, I was just taking notes as people were talking. When you talk about the NFL, one of my dear friends, who happened to be my boyfriend when I was in college, was an NFL football player who went on to or was a college football player who went off to play in the NFL. And I started to notice, and not just him, but other friends of his wearing their NFL rings. And I shared about this on a call recently. And I talked to them about their NFL rings. Like, why are you wearing your NFL ring when we're, walking around? It's kind of like showing off, right? In my mind, those rings are protection. When you're a 6'6" Black man who is probably 250, 300 plus pounds, there's already this fear around Black people, Black men, and then they're wearing those rings because then all of a sudden, oh, you're cool. Oh, you're okay. You're a football player. We don't have to be afraid of you. No. Why do we have to worry about that? That's exhausting. The health issues and the trauma that goes on for people because they have to think about that all the time. It's a lot. And I think these conversations are so important because people need to learn to walk in other people's shoes and find out what people are experiencing. Because George Floyd is the antithesis. He really had people see something that's been going on for such a long time. And finally, our people are saying no more.
So with that point, I'm going to move on to Pnina, to a similar tragic event that happened in Israel last summer. Before I introduce the issue, Pnina, I'm going to ask you to give me back my time and keep it short. Good luck with that. So in Israel, there was a similar incident, as I said, a year ago. In the summer of 2019, a young Israeli Ethiopian by the name of Solomon Teka was killed by a police officer, and widespread protests of the Ethiopian community consequently erupted. We're now a year later, and while it's not receiving a lot of news, I actually have not heard about it until Pnina told me, but the protests do continue, and there's especially an ongoing protest of Ethiopian mothers calling for justice for Ethiopian teenagers who are killed by the police. And just a few stats on the Israeli side, 90% of convicted Ethiopians are sent to prison, as opposed to approximately 25% of white Israelis. And 88% of Ethiopian minors who committed crimes are sent, sorry. That's the same. Okay, never mind. That's the same. Okay, sorry. Ignore me. Okay. So what I wanted to ask you is if you could please, address that and as sort of a moment that was a moment of maybe of change, at least in terms of the public attention that it got, and in general, police profiling and brutality towards Israeli Ethiopians. Wait, someone is not on mute. I have a feeling it's someone who's related to me. So.
Amira.
Ima, אמא, את עושה לי פדיחות?
We could carry on. It's okay.
Wow.
Move on. It's okay. Continue.
Okay, yes, Pina.
Okay, so first of all, there is the group you mentioned. They call themselves Mishmar Imaot, the Mother's Watch, and the idea they took is that they need to watch that justice is happening, because the policeman from that case a year ago wasn't Ursha, didn't convicted yet. I mean, now they back to that case. There's new witnesses that are brave enough to come and share the stories, which wasn't there before. But it's also tell you how the system is corrupt in the police, the police department in Israel, especially when you hear the chief officer of the police in Israel saying something that, like, it's by nature we suspect those people. What do you mean by nature we suspect those people? Why? Because their color, because they usually tend to do crime. I mean, what do you mean? And that's the chief officer saying that a couple years ago. And when it was released to the news, it's it's even made a bigger mess inside the community. And I will say that a lot of the conversation, which Sarah mentioned before, I feel like it's the same year. It's an important conversation to have. It's a lot of conversation about color. It's a lot of conversation that happening now about belonging, about a sense of being part of a bigger picture of our society, and accepting and embracing who we are without judging us. A lot of what happened the last protest was that many people say that, okay, why you needed to protest with violence? Why you needed to soft צמיגים, to burn tires and to hold the traffic for like 6 hours and 7 hours. And I wrote an article back then. I said, from my opinion, I mean, I don't want to say that the violence is fine and it's good to be more violent when you're facing violence, but I want to say that we weren't being heard so far. Those people try to raise the voice for our challenge. We try to raise the voice for how we feel, and no one listens. No one listens in the policymakers and not the friends around us. So we felt this is a time to really raise the voice, like be vocal and put it in front of you, and maybe now you would care. And I think only in the point where we will have more alliance with us, standing with us, that it's not only from the Ethiopian community, it's not going to be only our case, and people will care more about it. That will bring the change, because we shouldn't stand in, protesting only by ourselves when something like that happened. And the cases in Israel, Salman Teko was the last case, and hopefully will be really the last one. But since 1997, if I'm not wrong, that was the first case. We had 11 young men that being killed by policemen and never been solved. I mean, the cases was closed down. No one, the police officer, never been judged about those cases, and it hurts you. It hurts you as a person, as an individual, and it hurts you as a community, because they say, where's the justice? Why people doesn't care enough when a person's taking their life and you don't talk about it and you don't fight about it? Why? Because we're not part of the wider society. I mean, that's bring you back again to the question of, being a Jew, being part of the Jewish people, making all this effort of working for, 30 days, 40 days. Some people even made a lot of effort to come to Israel. And in the end of the day, you end up in a society where you're not being totally accepted. And I want to say something about the numbers you just mentioned, because I think that's one of the fascinating things in the story. It's, to comparing to the white young men, it's doubling the numbers of our size of the community. It's like double of the numbers. It's almost 20% of them are ending up in jail in the end of the day, 20% of our young people, which is a lot. And that's also tell you something about how the system in the police work. Like, it's based on recommendation. When a young Ethiopian man being convinced in crime, and by the way, the crimes, it's either robbing or violence. That's it. It's not about rape or killing or something like that.
It's called in America misdemeanors, I think.
Yeah, so when they got convicted, the recommendation of the officer is automatically to send them to jail. They don't recommend to send them to treatment to help them to get out. And most of those families are coming from a low socioeconomic family that they can't afford themselves even a good lawyer to fight back. When the same case happened to a white man, the recommendation is to send them to a treatment and pay for that and help them to get out of that, because they know that when you have a crime on your record, you can't join the army in Israel. And we're talking about teens, and the army service in Israel, it's important. It's very significant to be integrated if you're talking about integration in Israel. So if you have a crime in your record as a teen, you can't really join any elite group in the army. So you don't have a good service in the army, so you end up also in your civil life not having a good, a good start in your civil life as well. And that's actually, it's like a rolling ball that affects your life. Like a snowball that really affects your life. And I think that's what it's miserable in this case. I think this is like a really important point of why those recommendations happen in this way. And again, it's based on assumption of that based on our skin color, our background, the heritage, where we're coming from, and that should be off. We shouldn't have those things again. And I think also one last thing I will say that I would like to see more and more white people standing next to us, because I went to all the protests ever that the Ethiopian community had in my last 30 years living in Israel. In the last one, I think what was unique is to see most of the
someone else is unmuted, Maya. Please, sorry. Make sure it's not my mom and take care of it. Thank you.
Were young people, the young generation, and not our generation or our parent generation. But I rarely see white people come into the protest. When I went to the one in Tel Aviv, the one of the biggest one, I took a few friends of mine that are not Ethiopian on purpose to stand with me there to make a case. But then I saw two other male coming behind us, and it was ridiculous. And one of them was asking him, because they was trying to cross the main traffic, and said, "What's happening here?" And they looking around and say, "Oh, it's them again." "What do you mean them?" "Oh, it's just the Ethiopian. They have their protest again. I guess it's because of the police or something." I mean, I shouldn't hear something like that. I don't want to hear things like that. I want them to stand behind me and tell me, "We care about what you're saying. You're totally right. We stand next to you." And a couple months ago, there was a small protest in front of the chief police officer that was in charge of this investigation. And there was one Arab guy standing next to him. I saw that on TV. And Akatam, the reporter was standing, the reporter from the channel 2 was asking him, "What is this for? I mean, why are you here? It's not your story. It's them." And the guy told him, "We're being profiling by the police as well, as a minority, the Arab population in Israel. If we're not going to stand next to each other as groups that getting the same challenge again and again, who's going to stand next to us?" So I'm standing here today with my Ethiopian brothers because I know exactly how they feel. And I think we should have more and more stories like that. I give you back your time.
No, you really didn't, but it's okay. We'll talk about it later. And also, you didn't invite me to that protest, but we'll put that aside. So, but it's actually a natural segue for my final round, my final question for all three of you, and I will ask you to keep it as short as you can, because I do want to leave at least 10 minutes for questions. We have several questions coming in. But, the title of this panel is Leveraging a Moment of Crisis into Change. And I would like to try and also end on a more optimistic note, and also to touch upon what you were saying, Pnina. So first of all, a week ago, history was made in the US when a woman of color, Kamala Harris, and I probably mispronounced her name, even though I really didn't want to. Kamala, okay, sorry, was nominated as the first ever Black woman to run for vice president. And Pnina, as you mentioned earlier, in Israel, for the first time ever, an Israeli Ethiopian holds the position of a minister in the government. And what I'd like each of you to share is thoughts about this. I don't know if I should call it breakthrough, but let's say it is. I don't know if it's a watershed moment, but it's definitely something that is noteworthy. And I'd like to hear where you think we're heading with regards to issue of race, and and gender. Sadly, it's two different sort of, as we said, glass ceilings. And what needs to change? How can we come out on the other side? And as Nina mentioned, what role can listeners who are not of color play in helping, you know, to move this issue forward? So we'll start with Sarah.
I think policies, supporting policies that that can help support people living together, discrepancies of segregation that happens in this country. I also think racial literacy that starts with children. We know from the doll test at the age of 4 years old that Black children, if those of you have seen the doll test, when asked by a Black child who's looking at two different dolls, a white doll and a black doll, which doll is good, which doll is happy, which anything positive is the white doll, and the Black child is touching the black doll at 4 years old for everything negative. This starts so young. You can't start early enough to start teaching racial literacy in schools. I think that's a huge thing that needs to happen for understanding policies. And I also think allies, exactly what you said, people who are on this call. It's hard for me to say this, but the white people on this call, when you speak, it's different than when I speak. There's a different listening. People can say, oh, she's just overreacting, or they didn't mean that, or whatever. But when someone else says, no, that's not okay what you did to so-and-so, and someone is white or not a person of color, you know, it makes a huge impact. People are here for a reason, learning about these issues, but you have a voice that can shift things in ways that people who look like me seem like we could be complaining. No matter how great or how articulate or how brilliant someone can be, there's a listening just based on the color of our skin, which is so very, very frustrating. And we dealt with that with an issue doing work in Sierra Leone with my family there, trying to bring students over through the embassy. And I realized if we had a white man, maybe my dad, who's right here on the call with us, had been there to talk to the people at the embassy, maybe the students in Bumpé could have come to speak at the United Nations Commission conversation. But our embassy would not let them come through because my birth father in Africa, not knowing all the work that my family has done in Africa, meaning my African family, my uncle's the president of the country, my other uncle runs a chiefdom of 55,000, and they saw my Black man father walk into the American embassy with students, and they were just like, yeah, we think you're just gonna traffic these children. We were like, no, what? They've been invited by the United Nations. We have kids in Brooklyn, New York, who raise money to bring these kids over. Here's the letter from the United Nations inviting. No, we don't even want to look at the letter. So the discrimination of the Black conversation of racism is not just, of course, in America, it's everywhere. And people have different levels of power that they can use to stop things that could really expand children's learning in that example. So I have to say racial literacy, policies, and people standing beside us as allies and voices and supporting.
Thank you. Alexia.
Yeah, I'll just pick up on that point from Sarah on the allies and recognizing that these issues that we're addressing are not specific to Black people. The problem applies to all of us. It is not a Black person's problem only. It is our problem as society. And only as a more cohesive society will we be able to address it. And so I think that is, one point that I want to make. But the other point I want to make is about educating ourselves. I said before that I had become complacent and, taking things for granted, and trying to become more aware, not only of my own history, but of society and how we got to where we are, and in the hopes that we can go further. And a lot of that happens at home. There was a really good article, which I'll have to find and see if I can send it out, about how to educate your children not to be racist, right? That starts at home. It is the TV shows you watch, the music you're listening to. If everything that you're showing your kids involves white people, and very few of those people that they're seeing that you're enjoying for entertainment or for your news, et cetera, represent anybody else, then they're beginning to make those connections about what's positive versus what's negative. And so as soon as they see something that's different, because you as an individual or the parent or a relative haven't noted that those things are positive and enjoyable, then they're making those connections. And so, you know, we have to educate ourselves. Sarah mentioned White Fragility, which is a fantastic book that is written from a white person's perspective, discussing why it's so hard for white people to engage in the conversation about racism. Because a lot of times what you'll notice is when you start having these conversations, their eyes start glazing over, they're mentally shutting down because it's a hard conversation to have. But you have to begin to address your own biases and be aware of those. Another book I want to put a plug in for is called How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram. Yeah, okay, it looks like somebody's seen that. And it's a really, really good book. And I read that and I was like, wow, my eyes are much more open than they were. But engaging in those types of self-educational activities, and then not becoming complacent. We can't go back to assuming that everything's okay just because our life is okay. There are lots of things going on around us. You know, we're part of this community, we're part of this society. We have a responsibility to make things better for ourselves, our children, our grandchildren. And if we don't do those things, then we're just actually probably making it worse.
Thank you. Nina, you're the last one before I open it up for Q&A.
הבנתי את הרמז. So, back to
I
what...
understood the hint.
Okay, just to emphasize what Sarah said, I totally agree with you. So in Israel in 2016, after another case that we had in 2015, the government launched for the first time the Anti-Racism Unit, which is a government unit that deal with any racism act happening in Israel to any group, not only the Ethiopian groups, which I think it's a great thing that we have today. And it's doing something. Something is moving. It's not only the conversation, but people really being more mindful about what they say and how they act next to each other and how they treat other people. And it's not anymore just, you know, oh, that's fine, I just say that. We're not politically correct in America. People are really more cautious about how they say and what they say. Second of all, I would say just as a mother now for three little kids in a city where there's not a lot of diversity, I have to say, unfortunately, I see it as a mission personally to be in those places. Exactly because what you said, Alexis, even though we get to reach to those positions, we should not forget, you know, where we're coming from. And from my point, you know, many people will tell me, many people that know me as an activist will tell me, you should go back to those neighborhoods and live there where there's, you know, there's a majority of Ethiopian Jews to be a model for those community. And I'm saying, no, I should be a model where there's not any other Ethiopian, because I want to know, I want those people that never gonna go to the neighborhood where there's Ethiopian people to meet me and know and understand that we can be here, that we can speak fluently in Hebrew, that we can work, that we can do other stuff. And I think there's less of that, unfortunately, in Israel there, and there's something about what's happening in the reality in America that we can learn from you. And it's the language of how holding those kind of conversations that we don't have yet. We need to create this language of how we speak about race in Israel, especially because the history is a bit different. It's in the context of the nation and the states of Israel as a Jewish state. So it's a bit different, but we need to create that type of language where everyone feels comfortable to take part of this conversation. And I feel, as I said before, only when we see more and more faces of Black people in Israel serve in different positions from low and high, you will feel that we get into full integration and acceptance and understanding race and respecting. And I feel like we lack of respect yet here in Israel to this kind of, to our group as well. So, you know, being in this being in the city when there's only 20 Ethiopian families, I'm feeling that I'm challenging every day the people around me, and it's good. I mean, it's tiring, as you said, Sarah, it's tiring, mamash, but I feel that I also have a responsibility of the entire community in Israel to be a good model, you know, and to be a good representation of our community, and also to fight back in that, in language, in conversation.
Thank
That
you.
was short. No.
Everything is relative in life. I should say my former friend, Pnina. No, I'm just I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. Okay, so I may steal a bit more, so we'll end a bit later, but not too much. And I will go, I'll dive straight into the questions that we received. So actually one of them I think connects, I don't know if this is what you meant, Pnina, by talking about language in terms of needing to learn from the US. But one thing is for sure, in Israel, we do not know what speaking PC is. There isn't, the politically correct doesn't really exist in Israel. But some people feel, or at least before the Trump era, feel that there was too much political correctness in the US. So I'm curious to hear, and maybe start with really with Sarah and Alexius. Do you feel that in a way being too politically correct or not being too politically correct has had an influence in terms of promoting discrimination, or on the other hand, maybe helping to minimize the gap? And also, you know, there are a lot of actors and singers and influential African Americans today. Do you feel that they try to own their voice in terms of helping to bring about change?
I mean, I think it depends on what they're saying, right? I mean, I remember being in Turkey and everywhere I went, people were calling me Chico Latte. and I was like, what is that? It's a chocolate candy bar. And I was like, okay. It seems to be coming from a place of, you know, playfulness, so maybe I won't get offended, up until somebody asked me if I was the same color all over. Then I got offended, right? And so I think that, you know, political correctness can certainly, it can mask people's actual intent. But if you're coming from a place of genuine interest and wanting to learn, then, you know, I'm fine with saying it the way you think that you need to state yourself, right? But I feel like right now what we're seeing in the US is that there's a backlash against what was politically correct. And so the things that you could never say a few years ago, you're hearing regularly. And it's not coming from, you know, the people that you would think that, the people that you put like, oh, they're way on the outskirts on this argument, et cetera. It's coming from people that you know, people that you've interacted with, and you're like, wow, that's really fascinating. And so it's a learning moment right now, but I wouldn't mind getting back to a little bit more PC-ness.
Well, yeah, it's all relative. It's gone in the exact, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Sarah.
I think there's something to be said with political correctness and being woke. You know, we hear that a lot. Being politically correct, I think is important. Being aware of how you're speaking, how you're portraying people in the world and making you think, but also why. What is the wokeness? Are you, you know, that's the term that people are using, the students, the young folks are like, are you woke? Do you know why? Do you know where this is coming from? Do you know that certain people like to be identified as they, them, and theirs, which is very confronting for some people, but that's part of it. Do you know why certain things are, and being woke about it, and woke in the sense of reading these books, asking the questions, doing your research. Political correctness, I think, is extremely important to be aware of, and I think it should happen. And I also think you can't do it if you don't know what you're talking about. And it's important to understand why people are speaking the way they are and what the political correctness is behind it. So.
Thank you. Dina, do you have something to add to that?
We're not so politically correct in Israel.
Yeah, we don't know what that is. I think
one thing I just want to add in, it's like, I think that what we're missing in the absence of political correctness is a level of civility, right? Just being kind and being nice to people. And if you can be kind and be nice, then your message comes off a lot better. And if you can use language that's coming from that place and that point, then I think as a society and community, we'll be able to move forward and address these challenges much easier.
Okay, I think we just got a follow-up question for that. What is the difference between wokeness, political correctness, and diplomatic? Who wants to take that one?
Are the panelists the only ones allowed to answer here? A lot of intelligent people here.
Yes, and they made some really nice comments, which I'll read at the end when we're done soon. But you used the word woke, so I don't know if you want to explain it, but either one of you.
But I could just speak on woke, just being awake about what is happening in the world for people who are often considered minorities. Also being woke about what's going on. There are a lot of people unaware. It's just being aware of what's happening, being it in the term or the slang term or the term that is being used now as being woke. Know what's happening. Don't sit back and just go, oh, it's happening because of this, because that's what we sometimes do. Oh, the numbers are that because of that. Well, why? Do understand why, the research, like educating ourselves.
Yeah, and I would just add that, being woke doesn't apply to everything. I'll give you an example. I have a really, really good friend of mine who's white, and I've known her for years, and, we travel together. She's one of my best friends. When she was in her 20s, she decided to dress up as Erykah Badu for Halloween. Now, she did not, luckily, put on blackface in order to do that. She put on the outfit and the hair, the head wrap, etc. And everybody recognized that she was dressed up as Erykah Badu. However, recently she said to me, she came to visit me in Haiti, and she turned to me and said, am I going to be the only white person in this place? And I was like, well, I don't complain when I'm the only black person in the places that I go to with you. So that's why I'm saying it's a process, right? You have to begin to recognize the different levels of what's going on. And this is the same person who knew that blackface was wrong, but didn't also kind of get that as a black person, you're often the only one in the space, right? And you have to figure out how to make yourself comfortable there, until she was the only one in that space. And on diplomacy, usually diplomacy is the art of saying nothing while using a lot of words. So.
Oh, that's a polite description I've heard. I know. Yeah. Yeah, Sarah, did you want to add something?
I just think when you were talking about the costume being Erykah Badu, that's not to go down this train, but there's a whole conversation about cultural appropriations and people appropriating different cultures to look hip and so on. And that's a whole nother conversation, but important to know what that means and know about what happens around cultural appropriations.
Thank you. Okay, so because I don't want people are adhering to time, and even though we don't usually do that in Israel, I will try to do that. So I'll ask this one more question that we got from Tony. He asks, especially in the context of foreign service, how do you push back against the idea that confronting racism is actually a political argument and thus should stay away from it? He says, I deal with this as an Olympic athlete where we are forbidden from engaging in politics in many places when really many believe their activism is and should be viewed as apolitical.
So I assume that's for me.
Yeah, I assume so too.
I think that we have, in the Foreign Service, there has been a line drawn between personal and professional. And particularly under this administration, where the president announced his re-election campaign, 6 months into his first term. And so we were unable to make comments, and you were limited from what you could say on your Facebook about the administration, et cetera. And luckily, there's been a determination that's come out for us in the Foreign Service that engaging in social movements like Black Lives Matter is not considered political, even though it is political. But we've been given we've been given permission to participate in these types of activities. And they're looking at it more so as that, our LGBT rights issue or this is a race issue. And so they're compartmentalizing it to some degree, and it's a little bit artificial in the way that it's happening, but it works to, it works on another level. I'm not allowed to personally criticize the administration because that would go against my, my role within the US government, but I can still be out marching in the streets and showing my support and engaging in movements like Black Lives Matter. So that's how we're dealing with it now. It's not perfect, and hopefully we'll get more guidance as we go forward. But again, this is all a learning process for everybody. You know, we haven't had to deal with these types of issues on a professional level or at a governmental level where it's being received, where the messages are being heard to some degree. Previously, it would have been so far outside of the realm of, you know, possibility to change these types of things that it wouldn't have even have made it this far. So it's, like I said, it's a work in progress.
Okay, so I'm gonna ask, that was gonna be the last question, but Timmy, who, you know, thanks to her, we have you, Alexia, so I'm gonna give her the privilege of the last question. She asked if our esteemed panelists could talk about the notion of taking up space. Black people are often denied the opportunity to be themselves, to experience joy, to pursue their dreams without fear of reprisal or violence. That needs to change. I'd love your thoughts, says Timmy. No?
Oh, I thought you said it was for her, right?
No, it's for
No,
everybody.
Oh, everybody.
No, Timmy brought Alexia, so I felt, you know, the need to, so, no, it's for anyone. Or not.
I mean, I'll just jump in just quickly. I mean, I think that, you know, there has been a culture of, you know, don't be yourself. There, you know, don't be too loud. Don't wear too many colored clothes. Don't self-express, right? And you know, be grateful that you're here, as if you didn't earn the role that you're currently in. And I mean, I hope that that's changing. I think that, you know, one of the best ways to do that really is to continue to focus on diversity and to continue to engage. And I know I say it a lot, but I'm going to put this as my tagline on my emails. If you see something, say something, speak up. And, you know, and acknowledge, like I said, if I walk into a room and I'm the only woman in that meeting, I'm sitting at the table because that is my spot. I am not sitting on the back bench because I'm part of the leadership of this organization and I need to claim my spot. What was it, Maxine Waters, Reclaiming My Time? And, you know, I think that, you know, you have to continue to be an advocate for yourself as well as for others around you. And so if you see that you're the only woman at the table, even though there's other women in the room and sitting at the table, invite them to join you. If you see that there's no one of color in the room and you're having a conversation about race, know that maybe we should expand the people participating in this conversation in order to ensure that you're doing your part, however big or small, to broaden our society and move us forward.
Thank you. Nina and/or Sarah. Final words?
I totally agree with you, Alexis. I feel like sometimes, in my case at least, many times I will be the only Black woman in the room, and sometimes it's also, I don't know if you have those feelings, but sometimes I'll share with you something really, really personal, but sometimes you walk around with less confidence than more confidence. You're like, okay, I'm the only one here. Do they really want to hear me? Do they think I'm smart enough? And I don't know if it's coming from, you know, if it's only me as Nina, or it's something that all Black women feel when they're the minority, because I think it's a sense that only a minority can express. And in my case, I always tell my friend that I'm a minority and a minority of a minority, because as a woman, you're a minority, as a Black, you're a minority. And sometimes when I travel around as a Jew, I'm a minority among others. So it's like, it's really holding a lot of that in the space, when you walk in the space. And most of the time it's in my mind. I mean, I'm not sharing that. I will enter a room and I will smile, but it's in my mind and I can't ignore that. I will enter a room and I will think, okay, I'm the only Black woman in the room or the only Ethiopian woman in the room. So I have to be like this. I really have to be highlighted. I have to say smart thing. I have to also represent our side, our voice, even if I wasn't asked to, right? So I think for us, it's, if we talk about privilege, I don't have the privilege to just to be quiet. Or I don't have the privilege not to take a responsibility and not to speak out. I feel like I just don't have this privilege. Sometimes I tell to a lecture that I give to students, you know, especially for Jewish students, when you walk around on campus and you take out a Jewish star or a kippah because you don't want to identify as a Jew and you just want to assimilate and not to take all the burden of the Jewish people, because there is, you know, all this talked about the conflict in Israel, and you don't want to be related to Israel or the Jewish people, so you can take off and just be an American student, right? So in Israel, I can't just walk around. I don't have that privilege to take off my collar and say, I don't want to take any responsibility or anything related to the Ethiopian community. Everywhere I go, it will be related to me somehow. So any space I enter, if something even happened in the news, you know how many times I enter a room and there was something in the news like, you know, Ethiopian woman was murdered by her husband, and it was in the news. So the people, my colleagues will ask me, why it's happening in your community? Wait a minute, I'm the spokesman of the community, of the entire community. Why should I know? I mean, to give you that data, right? Or even if there is the first man to be the first Ethiopian to be a pilot in Israel. So everyone is excited and they will come to bless me in the office. Are you blessing me? I mean, why? I mean, it's
it's like when an Israeli wins in the Olympics, it suddenly becomes something that belongs to all of us.
But I think it's also something that Alexis, I think, described it beautifully. That it's about, you know, being cautious about the space you enter in, how people also caution about you. Should they, you know, and it's related also to the politically correct thing before. Should they say something like that? Like, wow, we happy for you. We happy for your community that there is the first Ethiopian pilot. Or shouldn't, because it's normal. Why not? Why shouldn't we have, after 35 years, someone like, you know, things like that. Why are you talking about a murder of Ethiopian woman if there is also a Bedouin woman being murdered, Moroccan woman? I mean, why that doesn't matter? Why it's a case? So it's also about like making those things normative and part of the normal, you know, just to be like everyone else and not to to be highlighted in a positive or negative way, you know. And that's something that I feel like many other maybe will feel like me, that you carry on with you and you can't just take it off. We don't have that privilege to take off, change. I mean, I can change my name. I can have a great accent in Hebrew. No one recognizes that, but it doesn't matter when they see me. And it's happened a lot. I mean, this gap happened a lot when I speak on the phone with someone. They think they speak with someone. And when they see me, they like get surprised. Why surprised? You know? So I always carry that on me when I walk around to meetings, to different spaces, knowing that and acknowledging that.
Thank you. And thank you for being so candid. Yes, Sarah.
I just think one of the things Alexis said that I think is really important is inviting other women to the table. And I run a nonprofit, I co-run a nonprofit with my brother doing work for the last almost 15 years in Sierra Leone. And we do work in public health, education, and female empowerment. And what I realize is when I'm sitting down in that culture, right, in Sierra Leone, I'm always with the men discussing things as the American, you know, daughter who comes back and forth. And I can sit there, we're having discussions. And one day I sat there and I went, all the women were over there and I'm sitting here with the men. And I looked at them, I said, can you come over here? And they're like, oh, no. It was so interesting. I thought, oh, I should have maybe talked to them before and had a conversation about them being part of this conversation, because in Sierra Leone, the women run everything. They're actually doing everything to make everything happen. But what I realized at the end of the day, the men are the ones often making the final decisions. And when we're doing work there, I'm often sitting with the men. So I love what you said about inviting more women to the table and having conversations, and how important that is in Sierra Leone and United States and Israel and everywhere. It's just extremely important.
Completely
in
agree.
general, women should rule the world in general.
Well, I mean, just look at the countries that are dealing, you know, with COVID the best, all led by women.
Right.
And New Zealand,
I have to say,
I meant Beyonce's song, not Beyonce running the world, but Beyonce's song about women running the world. Sorry. Thank you for interrupting.
I just want to say, I've been wanting to have this, to have this panel for a long time, but I said we need to have the right speakers. And for sure, absolutely, we want to have women, and for sure, women of color. And I could not be prouder, that I'm in the minority now, and I'm loving it. Although I can identify with so many of the things you said, even only from the gender perspective. So I can only try to imagine what it's like when you have a whole other, identity that you carry with you that you need, to deal with. But I'm so proud and honored and inspired by each and every one of you. And before the final words, I do want to share, first of all, we sent a feedback form, a link to a feedback form, very short. It will take you 1 minute. If please, everyone who's here can just quickly go in so we know what we're doing right and what we need to improve. And I do want to read some quick responses from people. You said, Sarah, before how important it is. I think it's unfortunate that the feeling that people, who are not of color are heard more. But for sure, in any case, we all need to speak up. And I'm just going to read 3 of those comments. One woman wrote, wherever we are, whoever we are, the social fabric of this society, Israel and the world, is our common problem, and for us to solve collectively. And a good friend of Pnina and mine, Ben Perry, wrote, let's stand up for each other. We all need to show up and speak up for each other. It's like we all know that when a non-Jew speaks up against anti-Semitism, it's more effective and more powerful. And finally, we need to understand that it's not about being able to speak Hebrew well or anything else of the sort. It's about all of us being children of God and worthy of being treated equally, regardless of how we physically are present on earth. And on that note, I want to again sincerely thank Pnina, Alexius, and Sarah. It wasn't only intriguing, it was a very candid conversation. And I think that's one of the advantages of Zoom, because you don't feel that you have a million people, that you're just having a sort of off-record conversation. And I think your own perspectives and, digging into your own stories, that a lot of them are painful. I think a lot of that is needed for all of us to be able, to look at it in the face and see, okay, this is something we need to recognize, and now let's recognize it and let's move forward together. And while that sounds like a cliche, I can tell you that I'm ending this on a very optimistic note. And I do want to encourage everyone to please follow, the Charney Forum on Facebook, LinkedIn, and our website. This is our goal, to have these conversations and to make impact and change. And I think the best and maybe only way to do that, you do want policy, but you absolutely want us to be able to conduct these conversations. So a huge thank you to you, the 3 of you, and thank you to Tzili Charney again for letting us, make this change together, and to my dedicated staff, Einat and Maya. And thank you to all of you. Most of you survived, even though we took almost 2 hours. So thanks again, and please fill out the feedback form, and good night and stay safe.
Thank you, Noah, for being extraordinary. And thank you, Tilly, for making this all happen. And thank you, Sandy, for connecting me to these wonderful people, and honored to be with the other 2 amazing women on this panel. And thank you all for being here.